Close your eyes for a moment and imagine a warm evening 10,000 years ago. The sun sets over golden fields of wild grain in the Fertile Crescent, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. In the distance, you hear the rustle of small paws moving through the undergrowth. A pair of luminous eyes catches the fading light, watching, waiting, calculating. This is where our story begins. Not with a grand declaration or a moment of conquest, but with a whisper. A quiet understanding between two species who would change each other's destinies forever. Tonight, we journey back to the dawn of agriculture, to the very moment when wildcats first glimpsed the firelight of human settlements and made a decision that would echo through millennia. This is not a tale of domestication in the way you might imagine it, not of humans capturing and taming wild beasts. No, this is a story of choice, of mutual benefit, and of one of nature's most independent creatures deciding that perhaps, just perhaps, there was something worthwhile in the company of humans. So settle in, get comfortable, and let us travel together through the mists of time, to the place where cats and humans first crossed paths, and where an extraordinary partnership began to unfold. To understand how the cat came to be our companion, we must first understand the world that existed before this partnership began. We must go back, far back, to a time when humans lived very different lives than we do today. Picture the world 12,000 years ago. The great ice sheets that had covered much of the northern hemisphere were finally retreating. The climate was warming, becoming more hospitable, more forgiving. And in a region that would later be called the Fertile Crescent, a sweeping arc of land stretching from the Persian Gulf through modern-day Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Israel, and into Egypt, something remarkable was beginning to happen. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans had lived as nomads. They moved with the seasons, following herds of wild animals, gathering fruits and seeds and roots wherever they could find them. They lived in small groups, perhaps 20 or 30 individuals, bound together by kinship and necessity. Their possessions were few, because everything they owned had to be carried from place to place. They knew the landscape intimately, every water source, every cave that could provide shelter, every stand of trees where birds might nest. But now, in this warming world, some humans were beginning to experiment with a radical new way of life. They were beginning to stay in one place. They were beginning to plant seeds deliberately, to tend crops, to harvest grain. They were beginning to build more permanent structures, at first just simple huts of mud and reeds, but structures nonetheless that would last more than a single season. This was the agricultural revolution, though the people living through it would not have called it that. To them, it was simply survival, simply adaptation to the changing world around them. But it would change everything, not just for humans, but for countless other species as well. The Fertile Crescent was perfectly suited for this new experiment. The region was blessed with wild ancestors of wheat and barley, which grew in thick stands across the hillsides. There were wild legumes, wild flax, wild fruit trees. The soil was rich, watered by the great rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, the Jordan, the Nile. The climate was Mediterranean, with wet winters and dry summers, perfect for grain cultivation. The earliest farmers were tentative, uncertain. They did not abandon their nomadic ways all at once. Instead, they moved between two worlds, sometimes planting and harvesting, sometimes still following the old paths, hunting and gathering as their ancestors had done. But gradually, over generations, the balance shifted. The planted fields became more reliable, more productive. The settlements became more permanent. And with permanence came storage. This is crucial to our story, you see. For the first time in human history, people were accumulating surplus food. They were harvesting more grain than they could eat immediately, and they were storing it, in clay vessels, in woven baskets, in underground pits lined with stone. They were storing it for the lean months, for the times when crops might fail, for trade with other settlements. These stores of grain, piled high in the corners of simple mud brick houses, stacked in communal storage buildings. These were like beacons, sending out an irresistible signal to every creature within miles. Because where there is grain, there are grain eaters. Where there are stores of seeds, there are mice and rats, seeking easy meals. The house mouse, Mus musculus, was perfectly adapted to take advantage of this new human behavior. These small, brown rodents, native to the steppes of Central Asia, began to follow humans into their settlements. They nested in the thatch roofs, they burrowed into the walls, they scurried through the storage buildings at night, eating their fill and contaminating what they couldn't consume. For the early farmers, this must have been maddening. They had worked so hard, clearing land, planting seeds, tending crops through the hot summers, harvesting and threshing the grain. And now, these tiny thieves were eating away at their winter food supply, their insurance against starvation, their wealth. They tried everything they could think of. They built better storage vessels, sealing them with clay. They raised their grain stores on platforms, hoping the mice couldn't climb. They set traps, simple things made of stone and wood. But the mice were persistent, clever, adaptable. For every solution the humans devised, the mice found a way around it. The settlements of the Fertile Crescent must have been alive with the sound of mice at night, the scratch of tiny claws, the rustle of movement through the grain, the soft squeaking as they communicated with each other in the darkness. The farmers would have lain awake, listening, calculating how much food they were losing, wondering if they would have enough to last until the next harvest. But the humans were not the only ones who noticed this abundance of mice. Out in the wild lands surrounding these early settlements, other eyes were watching. Other ears were listening. Other hunters were taking note of this sudden, concentrated food source. The African wildcat, Felis silvestris lybica, had roamed these lands for thousands of years, slightly larger than the domestic cats we know today. With longer legs and a leaner build, these wildcats were solitary hunters. Their coats were sandy brown or gray, striped with darker markings that helped them blend into the dry grasslands and rocky outcrops of their territory. Their ears were large and pointed, capable of detecting the slightest movement of prey. Their eyes were adapted to see in low light, giving them an advantage in the dawn and dusk hours when they preferred to hunt. These wildcats were perfectly designed rodent hunting machines. Their entire evolutionary history had shaped them for this purpose. They could hear the ultrasonic squeaks of mice, sounds inaudible to human ears. They could detect the tiny vibrations of a mouse moving through grass or grain. Their reflexes were lightning fast, their movements precise and calculated. A wildcat could wait, motionless, for an hour or more, watching a mouse hole, patient as stone. And when the moment came, they could strike with devastating accuracy. In the wild, these cats lived hard lives. They hunted across large territories, sometimes ranging for miles in a single night. Prey was scattered, unpredictable. Some nights they ate well. Other nights they went hungry. They faced competition from other predators. Foxes, jackals, birds of prey. They faced dangers from larger carnivores. Leopards, hyenas, wolves. Their lives were solitary, meeting with other wildcats only to mate, then parting ways again. But now something was changing. These human settlements, with their concentrated populations of mice and rats, were offering something unprecedented, a reliable, abundant food source in a small area. A wildcat could find more prey in a single night around a human granary than in a week of hunting in the wild. And so they began to come closer, not all at once, not in a rush. Wildcats are cautious creatures, suspicious of anything new or strange. But hunger is a powerful motivator, and curiosity is strong in the feline heart. The first wildcats to venture near the human settlements probably did so at night, when the humans were asleep. They would have stayed at the edges, in the shadows, testing the air for danger, listening for threats. And they would have discovered that these strange, upright creatures posed no immediate threat. The humans, absorbed in their own concerns, barely noticed the silent hunters in the darkness. And the hunting around the settlements was good. Oh, so very good. The mice were everywhere, fat and slow from easy living. The rats were bold, unwary. A wildcat could catch several in a single night, more than enough to fill their belly and then some. Word spread in the way that such things do in the animal kingdom. Perhaps young wildcats, dispersing from their mother's territory to find their own, discovered these settlements and the easy hunting they offered. Perhaps neighboring cats noticed that their rivals were looking well-fed and sleek, and investigated. Perhaps it was simply that multiple wildcats independently made the same discovery. However it happened, more and more wildcats began to orient their territories around the human settlements. They didn't enter the settlements themselves, not yet. They were still wild, still wary, still independent. But they lingered at the edges, in the fields nearby, in the scrubland just beyond the last houses. They learned the rhythms of human life, when the people were active, when they slept, when it was safest to venture close. The stage was set. The players were in position. Humans trying to protect their grain stores from mice. Mice thriving in unprecedented numbers. And wildcats, drawn by the abundance, beginning to see these human settlements not as threats to be avoided, but as opportunities to be exploited. Neither species knew it yet, but they were on the brink of one of the most remarkable partnerships in the history of life on Earth. The domestication of the cat was about to begin, not through force, not through human intention, but through mutual benefit and quiet coexistence. The world was ready for cats to enter the human story, and in the darkness, with eyes gleaming in the firelight, they were ready to take their first tentative steps toward us. Imagine you are one of those early farmers, living in a small settlement somewhere in the Levant, perhaps near the site that archaeologists would one day call Jericho or Keonu. Your house is simple, walls of mud brick, a roof of wooden beams covered with reeds and packed earth. The floor is hard-packed earth as well, smooth from years of footsteps. In one corner, there are storage jars, carefully sealed, filled with the grain you harvested 3 months ago. In another corner, your sleeping area, simple mats woven from reeds, perhaps a sheepskin or two for warmth. It is late at night. The fire in the central hearth has burned down to embers, giving off a soft, orange glow and a little warmth against the chill of the desert night. Your family sleeps around you, your partner, your children, perhaps your aging parents. The only sounds are their breathing, the occasional pop from the dying fire, and, what's that? A scratching sound, a rustling. You've heard it before many times. The mice are in the grain again. You sigh, too tired to get up and do anything about it. Tomorrow you'll check the jars, see how much has been eaten, maybe set some traps. But for now, you just want to sleep. Then a different sound, a very soft padding, almost imperceptible. The quality of the silence changes somehow, becomes charged with a tension you can feel but not name. The mice sounds stop abruptly. You open your eyes, just slightly, peering through your lashes. The firelight is dim, but your eyes have adjusted to the darkness. And there, silhouetted against the faint glow from the hearth, you see a shape, low to the ground, moving with fluid grace. For a moment, your heart jumps. Is it a threat? Some predator that has entered your home? But no, it's too small for a leopard or a wolf, and it's not interested in you at all. You watch as the shape moves toward the grain storage area. It sits very still, ears pricked forward, watching, waiting. A mouse emerges from behind one of the jars. In a movement almost too fast to follow, the cat-shaped shadow pounces. There's a brief squeak, cut short, and then silence. The creature settles down to eat its catch, the sound of small bones crunching oddly loud in the quiet house. You watch for a few more minutes, fascinated despite yourself. Then, reassured that this is no threat, you close your eyes and drift back to sleep. In the morning, you find a few drops of blood on the floor near the grain jars, and the scattering of tiny bones. But the grain itself is untouched. This scene, or something very like it, probably played out hundreds of times in hundreds of different houses across the Fertile Crescent over the course of centuries. The first real encounters between humans and wildcats were probably just like this. Accidental, nocturnal, characterized more by mutual indifference than by any sense of connection. The wildcats were hunting. The humans were sleeping. As long as the cats confined their attention to the mice and rats, and didn't threaten the humans or their livestock, there was no conflict. In fact, there was benefit. The cats were doing what the humans desperately wanted done, reducing the rodent population. At first, these encounters were probably rare and sporadic. A cat might venture into a house once, catch a few mice, and then disappear back into the wild for weeks. The humans, waking to find evidence of the nocturnal visitor, might have felt pleased, surprised, even a bit unnerved. What was this creature that came and went like a ghost? serving as an invisible guardian of their food stores. But over time, patterns began to emerge. Certain cats began to return to the same houses, the same settlements. Perhaps they remembered the good hunting. Perhaps they marked the territory in the way cats do, establishing a claim. The humans, too, began to recognize individual cats. That one with the distinctive stripe pattern on its face. The one with the torn ear. The sleek, dark one that seemed particularly bold. And here is where something crucial happened, something that would shape the entire future of cat-human relations. The humans made a choice. They chose not to drive the cats away. This might not seem like a momentous decision. After all, the cats weren't doing any harm, quite the opposite. But consider the alternatives. Early farmers had to be protective of their settlements and their food stores. They couldn't afford to be sentimental about wild animals. Wolves that came too close were driven off or killed. Jackals were chased away. Even wild dogs, which might have been in the early stages of their own domestication, had to prove their usefulness to be tolerated. The wildcats, by their nature, made this tolerance easier. They weren't aggressive toward humans. They didn't form packs that might threaten the community. They didn't try to steal food directly from the people, only from the mice and rats. They kept to themselves, asking nothing, offering only their services as rodent control. But still, the humans could have chosen differently. They could have seen the wildcats as competitors for game animals in the surrounding lands. They could have feared them as potential threats to small children or livestock. They could have simply been uncomfortable with these wild predators in their midst, with eyes that glowed in the firelight and movements that seemed almost supernatural in their silence and grace. Instead, they tolerated them. They let them come and go. And in doing so, they created a space where the wildcat could begin to change, to adapt, to become something new. Not all wildcats made this transition, of course. Many remained in the wild, living as their ancestors had lived, solitary and independent. Even today, African wildcats exist in the wilds of the Middle East and North Africa, largely unchanged from their ancestors of 10,000 years ago. But some, the boldest, the most curious, the most adaptable, began to spend more and more time around human settlements. And this proximity began to change them, slowly, subtly, in ways that would only become apparent over many generations. The process was gradual, almost imperceptible. A wildcat that could tolerate human presence had an advantage over one that was too fearful. It had access to better hunting grounds, to more prey, to the shelter that the buildings provided from weather and larger predators. That cat would be better fed, healthier, more likely to survive and reproduce. And its kittens, raised in close proximity to humans, would be just slightly more tolerant of human presence than their parent had been. Not tame, not domestic, but comfortable, habituated. They would know, from the very beginning of their lives, that the strange upright creatures meant no harm. The humans, too, were changing in their perceptions. At first, the wildcats were just useful pest controllers, barely noticed except when they occasionally appeared in the dim light. But gradually, people began to pay more attention to them. Someone noticed how gracefully they moved, how precise their movements were. Someone else appreciated their quiet efficiency, the way they could clear a building of mice in a single night. And perhaps, though we can only speculate, someone found a litter of kittens, abandoned or orphaned, and felt a pang of sympathy. Kitten behavior is evolutionarily designed to trigger caring responses in adult mammals. Those large eyes, the small size, the soft mewing sounds, these provoke nurturing instincts even across species. Did some early farmer take in orphaned kittens, feed them scraps of meat, let them grow up around human children? Perhaps. Certainly possible. But even if this happened, it probably didn't stick. Wildcats raised by humans but not selectively bred for tameness would still have reverted to wild behavior as adults. They would have left the settlement when they matured, seeking their own territories, their own mates. The true domestication of the cat would not happen through such individual acts of kindness, but through the slow, patient work of natural selection, acting on generation after generation of cats that chose to live alongside humans. We must remember that this was not a quick process. It was not accomplished in years or even in decades. The changes we're describing, the gradual habituation to human presence, the slight shifts in behavior and temperament that would eventually create the domestic cat. These took centuries, perhaps millennia, to unfold. During this time, the settlements themselves were changing and growing. The early, tentative experiments in agriculture were becoming more sophisticated. People were developing better tools, better techniques for cultivation. They were domesticating other animals, sheep and goats first, then cattle and pigs. They were learning to irrigate fields, to breed plants for desired characteristics, to build larger and more permanent structures. The grain stores were getting bigger. The mouse populations were exploding. And the wildcats were becoming an increasingly common sight in and around the settlements. There must have been variation in how different communities received the wildcats. Some settlements might have actively encouraged them, perhaps putting out scraps of fish or meat to entice them to stay. Others might have been more ambivalent, tolerating them but not particularly welcoming them. Still others might have tried to keep them at a distance, viewing them with suspicion or fear. But overall, across the region, a pattern was emerging. Wildcats and humans were learning to coexist. They were sharing space, if not yet truly sharing lives. They were bound together by a common enemy, the rodents that threatened the grain stores, and by the simple fact that neither posed a significant threat to the other. The great experiment in cat domestication was underway. Neither humans nor cats had chosen it deliberately. There had been no grand plan, no moment of decision. It had simply happened, emerging naturally from the circumstances that brought these two species into proximity. In the darkness of 10,000 years ago, in the grain stores and houses of the Fertile Crescent, something new was being born. A relationship that would eventually spread across the world. A partnership that would bring the cat from the wild margins into the very centers of human life. But we are still in the early stages of this story. The wildcats at this point were still very much wild. They were not pets, not companions, not even really tolerated members of the household. They were useful wildlife that happened to live nearby, that happened to provide a service that humans valued. The transformation from this to the purring, affectionate house cats we know today, that lay curled on our laps and sleep at the foot of our beds, would take thousands more years and would involve changes so profound that the wildcats of the Fertile Crescent would barely recognize their descendants. But the foundation was being laid. The first tentative connections were being made. Human and cat were finding reasons to tolerate each other's presence. And in the quiet moments of those ancient nights, as farmers slept and wildcats hunted, the future was being written in soft paw prints on the dusty floors of the world's first villages. To understand how the wildcat became the house cat, we need to understand something fundamental about how domestication works. It's not magic. It's not even really intentional, at least not in the beginning. It's evolution, pure and simple, natural selection operating on a population over time, favoring certain traits over others. When a wild animal population begins living in close proximity to humans, the selection pressures change dramatically. Traits that were advantageous in the wild might become neutral or even disadvantageous in this new environment. And traits that were rare or even selected against in the wild might suddenly become beneficial. For the wildcats living around human settlements in the Fertile Crescent, the most important trait was tameness, or rather, a reduced fear response to humans. In the wild, a cautious wildcat that avoided all contact with humans would have no particular disadvantage. But around the settlements, where the best hunting was, a wildcat that fled every time it heard human voices or saw human movement would lose access to the richest food source. So the bolder cats, not aggressive but simply less fearful, had an advantage. They could hunt closer to human activity. They could explore the grain stores even when humans were nearby. They could tolerate the sounds and smells and movements of human life that would send their more timid cousins fleeing into the darkness. And this trait, like all traits with a genetic basis, would be passed on to their offspring. A less fearful mother cat might choose to have her kittens in a sheltered corner of a human building rather than out in the exposed wilderness. Her kittens, raised around the sounds and sense of human life from the very beginning, would grow up even more comfortable with human presence than she was. Generation by generation, the population of cats around the settlements was shifting. The average level of fearfulness was decreasing. The cats were becoming, slowly but surely, more tolerant of humans. But something else was happening too, something more subtle. A phenomenon known as domestication syndrome was beginning to exert its influence. Scientists have observed that when animals are domesticated, whether it's dogs or cattle or pigs, or even silver foxes in controlled experiments, they often develop a suite of physical changes that seem to come along for the ride with tameness. These changes include things like floppy ears, curly tails, patches of white fur, shorter snouts, and more rounded, juvenile-looking faces. Why? The answer has to do with neural crest cells, a type of stem cell that plays a crucial role in embryonic development. These cells migrate throughout the developing embryo and contribute to many different structures, including parts of the nervous system, pigment cells, facial cartilage, and more. When selection favors reduced fearfulness and aggression, which is essentially what's happening in early domestication, it seems to affect the migration and differentiation of neural crest cells. The result is that various physical traits get altered as a side effect of selecting for behavioral traits. Now, the domestic cat shows this syndrome less dramatically than many other domestic animals. Cats, after all, retained most of their wild appearance. They didn't develop the dramatically shortened snouts of bulldogs or the floppy ears of spaniels. But the changes are there if you know where to look. The early domestic cats, the ones living around settlements 3,000 or 4,000 years after the first wildcats began frequenting human grain stores, would have started to show some subtle differences from their wild cousins. Perhaps a slight softening of the facial features. Occasional patches of unusual coloring, white spots, different tabby patterns. Slightly smaller body size, since they no longer needed to be large enough to hunt in the challenging wild. Their voices might have changed too. Wildcats are generally silent except during mating season or when threatened. They don't meow much as adults. But domestic cats are famously vocal, with a repertoire of meows, chirps, trills, and purrs that they use to communicate with humans. This was probably selected for cats that could effectively communicate their needs to humans might get more food, more care, more of whatever they wanted. The purr is particularly interesting. All cats can purr, even the big cats to some degree, but domestic cats purr frequently and in a wide variety of contexts. They purr when content, yes, but also when nervous, when in pain, when giving birth. Some researchers believe that purring has a self-soothing function, that the vibrations actually promote healing and pain relief. But cats also purr when interacting with humans in a way they don't with other cats. They've learned, over generations, that humans respond positively to purring. It signals contentment and friendliness in a way that humans instinctively understand. A purring cat is an approachable cat, a cat that seems to welcome interaction. And so cats that purred readily around humans would have had an advantage. They would have been more likely to receive positive attention, food, shelter, protection. The behavioral changes went beyond just reduced fearfulness. The early domestic cats were also becoming more social, or at least more tolerant of other cats. Wildcats are solitary, remember. They maintain territories and actively avoid other adult cats except during mating. But around human settlements, where food was abundant and concentrated, multiple cats could coexist in a relatively small area without constant conflict. This required some behavioral flexibility. Cats had to learn to tolerate the presence of other cats, to share hunting grounds, to maybe even cooperate in some basic ways. Not to the extent that dogs, with their pack ancestry, could cooperate. Cats would always be more independent. But enough to make group living possible. We can imagine the scene. 5 or 6 cats, lounging in the shade near a granary on a hot afternoon. They're not cuddling or playing together. They maintain their personal space, but they're peaceful, tolerant of each other's presence. One yawns, another stretches. A third gets up and saunters off to check if any mice have emerged. The others barely flick an ear in acknowledgement. This kind of peaceful coexistence would have been rare or impossible among true wildcats, whose territorial instincts would have led to conflict. But for the semi-domestic cats of the early settlements, it was becoming the norm. The breeding patterns were changing too. In the wild, female wildcats come into heat seasonally, usually in the spring. But domestic cats, living in the more stable and abundant environment of human settlements, began to have less rigid breeding schedules. Some females would have multiple litters per year. Kittens could be born in different seasons. This meant more opportunities for reproduction, faster population growth, and more genetic diversity in the domestic population. It also meant that the changes we're describing, the selection for tameness, for sociability, for all the traits that made cats better suited to living alongside humans, could happen faster, accumulating more quickly over generations. But here's what's crucial to understand. Even as these changes were occurring, cats were not being truly domesticated in the way that other animals were. Humans were not actively breeding them, not selecting which cats could mate and which couldn't, not managing their reproduction. Cats were domesticating themselves. Or rather, natural selection, operating in the new environment created by human settlements, was doing the work of domestication. The cats were evolving to fit a new ecological niche, the niche of commensal animal living alongside humans, eating the pests that ate human food, but not being owned or controlled by humans. This is fundamentally different from how dogs were domesticated, where humans actively selected certain wolves to breed. It's different from cattle, where humans controlled which bulls could breed with which cows. It's even different from chickens, where humans kept breeding populations confined. Cats came and went as they pleased. They bred with whoever they chose. They couldn't be controlled or contained. And this independence, this freedom, has shaped the entire character of the domestic cat even to this day. A domestic dog, descended from ancestors who were actively selected by humans to be obedient and responsive to human commands, looks to humans for guidance and approval. A domestic cat, descended from ancestors who chose to associate with humans on their own terms, maintains an air of independence. They cooperate when it suits them. They demand rather than beg. They come when called, or they don't, depending on their mood. This is not a flaw in their domestication. It's a feature. It's the result of how they became domestic through self-selection rather than human-directed breeding. During these long centuries of gradual change, there must have been enormous variation in the cat population. At one end of the spectrum, there were still completely wild individuals, living far from human contact, unchanged from their ancestors. At the other end, there were cats that were practically tame, that lived in and around human houses, that perhaps even sought out human contact. And in between, there was every gradation imaginable. Cats that tolerated humans but kept their distance. Cats that would take food from humans but wouldn't let themselves be touched. Cats that were friendly to the humans they knew but fled from strangers. Cats that were tame as kittens but reverted to wildness as adults. The population was fluid, with wild genes constantly flowing back into the semi-domestic population as wild males bred with domestic females, or as domestic cats that wandered too far from settlements paired with wild individuals. This gene flow probably slowed the domestication process. It was a constant source of wildness being reintroduced into the population, but it also kept the domestic cats genetically healthy, avoiding the inbreeding problems that would plague many domestic animal breeds in later centuries. And it meant that the changes that were occurring were robust, persistent changes, traits that conferred real advantages in the settlement environment, strong enough to persist even in the face of constant genetic mixing with wild populations. The people living through these changes probably didn't notice them happening. The changes were too slow, too subtle. To them, cats were just cats. The wild hunters that lived around the edges of their settlements, that sometimes appeared in their houses, that kept the mice at bay. They might have noticed that the cats seemed slightly less skittish than they remembered from their childhood, or that unusual coat colors seemed to be becoming more common. But they wouldn't have thought of it as domestication. That concept didn't even exist yet. They simply lived alongside the cats, accepting their presence, benefiting from their services. And in doing so, they created the environment in which the wildcat could transform, could evolve, could become something new. Somewhere in this long process, we can't pinpoint exactly when, the domestic cat, Felis catus, emerged as a distinct entity from its wild ancestor, Felis silvestris lybica. The line between wild and domestic was blurry for a long time, and indeed remains somewhat blurry even today. But gradually, the differences accumulated. The domestic cat was no longer just a wildcat that happened to live near humans. It was becoming a separate thing, shaped by its association with humans, adapted to the niche that humans had unknowingly created. And the humans, too, were changing in their relationship to the cats. They were moving from mere tolerance to something warmer. They were beginning, perhaps, to appreciate the cats not just as pest control, but as something more. as living beings with personalities, with habits, with their own peculiar charm. The stage was set for the next phase of the relationship, the move from commensal animal to genuine companion. But we're not quite there yet. We're still in the slow, patient middle of the story, in the long centuries of gradual change, where cats and humans were learning to live together, learning to understand each other, setting the foundation for the deep bond that would eventually develop. The wildcat was becoming something new, and the world would never be quite the same again. As we move forward in time, from the earliest agricultural settlements to the great civilizations of the ancient world, the status of the cat begins to change dramatically. The small, semi-wild pest controllers of the Neolithic villages were about to become something far more significant, cultural icons, religious symbols, and cherished members of households across the ancient Near East and Mediterranean. Let us travel now to Egypt around 2000 BCE. The Egypt of the Middle Kingdom, with its great cities along the Nile, its massive irrigation projects, its temples and palaces, its armies and bureaucracy. This is no longer the simple farming society of the Fertile Crescent. This is a complex civilization with writing, mathematics, architecture, art, and a rich religious life that permeated every aspect of existence. And at the heart of Egyptian civilization, we find the cat. The ancient Egyptians didn't just tolerate cats. They didn't just appreciate their services as pest controllers, though that was certainly important. The Egyptians venerated cats. They associated them with divinity. They made them central figures in their religious practices. They surrounded them with such reverence and protection that killing a cat, even accidentally, could be punished by death. How did this happen? How did the cat go from being a useful wild animal to being a semi-sacred being? The answer lies partly in Egypt's unique circumstances. Egypt was one of the great breadbaskets of the ancient world, producing enormous quantities of grain that fed not just the Egyptian population but were exported across the Mediterranean. The Nile's annual floods deposited rich, fertile silt across the floodplain, creating ideal conditions for agriculture. But this abundance of grain also meant abundance of grain-eating pests. The ancient Egyptians stored grain in massive silos and warehouses. These stores represented the wealth and security of the nation. They were what allowed Egypt to survive years of poor floods, to feed its armies, to trade with other peoples. Protecting these stores from mice and rats wasn't just practical. It was essential to the survival and prosperity of Egyptian civilization. And cats, by this time, had proven themselves to be the most effective solution to the rodent problem. Better than traps, better than human vigilance, better even than other predators like weasels or small snakes that people might have tried to use. Cats were efficient, reliable, and self-sufficient. They didn't need to be fed or cared for. They simply hunted, day after day, night after night, keeping the rodent populations in check. So the Egyptians valued cats highly for purely practical reasons. But that's not the whole story. The Egyptians saw in cats something that resonated deeply with their religious and cultural worldview. Consider the qualities of the cat. Cats are graceful, elegant, perfectly controlled in their movements. They seem to embody a kind of divine perfection, moving through the world with absolute confidence and poise. They're clean, fastidious, spending hours grooming themselves to spotless perfection. They're mysterious, their expressions often inscrutable, their motivations opaque. They can be affectionate one moment and aloof the next, giving and withholding their attention seemingly at whim. To the Egyptians, these qualities were divine. The cat seemed to exist in multiple realms at once. Domestic yet wild, gentle yet fierce, lazy yet explosive in action. It was a creature of contradictions, perfectly balanced between opposites. And the ancient Egyptian mind, which saw the world in terms of such balances, order versus chaos, the fertile Nile versus the sterile desert, life versus death, found in the cat a perfect symbol. The goddess Batet emerged as the primary feline deity, though cat imagery was associated with several Egyptian goddesses, including Sekhmet and Mut. Batet was originally depicted as a fierce lioness, associated with the protecting rays of the sun. But over time, especially during the late period of Egyptian history, her image softened. She became associated with domestic cats, with protection, with fertility, with the joys and comforts of home life. Temples to Batet were built throughout Egypt, the most famous being at the city of Bubastis in the Nile Delta. These temples housed hundreds, perhaps thousands, of cats. Pilgrims would come from across Egypt to worship, to make offerings, to seek the goddess's favor. And one way they could show their devotion was through the cats themselves. It became common practice for Egyptians to mummify cats when they died, just as they mummified their human dead. Archaeological excavations have uncovered vast cat cemeteries near temples, containing thousands upon thousands of mummified cats, carefully wrapped in linen, sometimes placed in elaborately decorated sarcophagi. Some of these were clearly beloved pets, mummified at great expense by grieving owners. But many others, perhaps most, were probably raised specifically for the purpose of being sacrificed as offerings to Batet. This might seem cruel to our modern sensibilities, but in the Egyptian worldview it was an honor. The cats were being transformed into eternal beings, given the same preservation and passage to the afterlife that humans sought for themselves. Egyptian homes increasingly kept cats as members of the household, not just as working animals but as companions. Egyptian art from this period shows cats sitting under chairs at banquets, wearing collars, eating from dishes. One famous painting from a tomb shows a cat sitting beneath its owner's chair during a fishing trip, holding a bird in its mouth. The Egyptians gave their cats names, just as they did their children. Names like Mayat, meaning cat, or Tamayat, meaning the female cat, or sometimes more elaborate names with religious significance. They mourned when their cats died. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, described how Egyptian families would shave their eyebrows as a sign of mourning when their cat died. But Egyptian law also strictly controlled cats. It was illegal to harm a cat. It was illegal to export cats from Egypt. The Egyptians wanted to maintain their monopoly on these valuable animals. When Egyptian houses caught fire, Herodotus tells us, people would rush to save their cats before their possessions. He also relates, though this may be somewhat exaggerated, that crowds of Egyptians would gather around burning buildings, more concerned with preventing cats from running into the flames than with fighting the fire. Despite these restrictions, cats did begin to spread beyond Egypt. Phoenician traders, those seafaring merchants who ranged across the Mediterranean, probably smuggled cats aboard their ships. After all, ships need protection from rats even more than houses do. A cat or two aboard a trading vessel would keep the precious cargo of grain or cloth safe from rodent damage during long voyages. And so cats traveled to Greece, to Rome, to the islands of the Mediterranean, to the ports of the Black Sea. Wherever grain was stored and traded, wherever humans built cities and warehouses, the cats followed or were brought or stowed away and established themselves. In Greece, cats began to appear in art and literature, though they never achieved the religious significance they had in Egypt. The Greeks already had a pet of choice for rodent control, weasels and ferrets, which they kept semi-tame and used for hunting mice. Cats had competition, but gradually the superior hunting abilities of cats and their more pleasant temperament won out. By the classical period, Greek households increasingly kept cats. Greek writers mention them, usually in passing, as common features of domestic life. The philosopher Plutarch wrote about the intelligence of cats, noting how they would lie in wait for prey with extraordinary patience. In Rome, cats became common during the imperial period. Roman villas, with their elaborate gardens and storerooms, were perfect environments for cats. Roman traders carried cats throughout the empire, from Britain to North Africa, from Spain to Mesopotamia. Wherever Roman civilization spread, cats followed. The practical value of cats remained paramount throughout the ancient world. This was not the modern era of cat fancy, where cats are bred primarily for appearance and companionship. Ancient cats still worked for their living, even if they were also loved and valued as household members. But the relationship was deepening. Cats were no longer just wild animals that happened to live around humans. They were being integrated into human society, into human households, into human affections. They were being given names, being mourned when they died, being depicted in art, being woven into mythology and religion. The cat was learning to live with humans, yes, but humans were also learning to live with cats, learning to appreciate their qualities, to understand their moods, to accept their independence while still offering them affection and care. Different cultures responded to cats differently. The Egyptians venerated them. The Greeks appreciated them pragmatically. The Romans adopted them practically. But across all these cultures, a pattern was emerging. Cats were becoming part of the human world, not as servants, not as property exactly, but as what? Companions? Cohabitants? Partners in the shared project of civilization. The relationship was still being defined. Would never fully be defined, really. The cat would always maintain a certain wild independence, a certain remove, even as it settled more and more completely into human homes and human hearts. In the households of the ancient world, we can see the relationship taking forms that would be familiar to any modern cat owner. The cat that sleeps on the warmest spot in the house. The cat that demands food by weaving around ankles and meowing. The cat that brings dead mice to its human, perhaps as a gift, perhaps as a display of prowess. The cat that sometimes wants affection and sometimes emphatically doesn't, that purrs when petted but might bite if the petting goes on too long. Ancient people were learning what all cat owners learn, that you can't really own a cat. You can only be allowed to share space with one, on terms that the cat establishes and may change at any moment. But they were also discovering the joys of cat companionship. The comfort of a purring cat on a cold night. The entertainment of watching cats play, stalking imaginary prey, pouncing on shadows. The affection that cats can show, when they choose to show it. The headbutts, the slow blinks, the soft chirps of greeting. As the ancient world matured and expanded, as trade routes spread and cities grew, cats spread with them. They became ubiquitous in the human landscape, common enough to be unremarkable, yet still retaining something of their mystique. They were simultaneously everyday and magical, ordinary and extraordinary. The domestication was essentially complete by this point. The physical and behavioral changes that separated domestic cats from their wildcat ancestors were established. Genetic studies suggest that all modern domestic cats trace their ancestry back to this period, to the cats of the ancient Near East and Egypt. But the story wasn't over. Far from it. The spread of cats across the world, their adaptation to countless different environments and cultures, their journey from the palaces of Egypt to the farms of Europe to the temples of Asia, all of that was still to come. For now, in the ancient world, the cat had achieved a kind of equilibrium with humans. It was domestic, but not domesticated in the sense that it was controlled or owned. It was valued, but not for any single purpose. Rather, for a combination of practical utility, aesthetic appeal, and ineffable charm. The wildcat of the Fertile Crescent had become the house cat of civilization. It had made the leap from wild to domestic, from solitary hunter to urban dweller. It had adapted to human company while maintaining its essential feline nature. And humans, for their part, had made space in their lives and homes and hearts for this creature. They had learned to appreciate the cat on its own terms, to value its independence even as they enjoyed its company. It was a partnership unlike any other in the domestication of animals. A partnership based not on domination but on mutual benefit. Not on control but on coexistence. Not on training but on acceptance. And it was a partnership that would endure, would spread, would deepen, for thousands of years to come. The cat's journey with humanity was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning. Now that the domestic cat had firmly established itself in human society, we can pause and reflect on what makes cats. Well, cats. What are the characteristics that define them? What makes them different from all other domestic animals? And how did these traits emerge from or persist through the domestication process? Let us start with independence. This is perhaps the most defining characteristic of cats, the quality that sets them apart from dogs and most other domestic animals. A dog, descended from pack-living wolves, has been selected for thousands of years to be responsive to human leadership, to seek approval, to follow commands. Dogs look to humans for guidance and reassurance. They have, in a sense, substituted the human family for the wolf pack, with humans as the pack leaders. Cats don't think this way. Cats have never been pack animals. Their wild ancestors were solitary hunters who maintained their own territories and made their own decisions. And even after thousands of years of living alongside humans, cats retain this independent streak. The cat will come when called. Maybe, if it feels like it, if it's not busy with something else, if it wants whatever you're offering. But it might also simply look at you, acknowledge that it heard you, and then deliberately turn away and go about its business. This isn't disrespect or stupidity. Cats are perfectly capable of learning their names and responding to commands when they choose to. It's simply that they don't feel obligated to obey. This independence extends to problem solving. Where a dog might look to a human for help when confronted with a difficult situation, a cat will usually try to solve the problem itself first. Cats are remarkably persistent and creative problem solvers when motivated. They can figure out how to open doors, cabinets, even simple latches. They can learn to manipulate their environment in complex ways. But here's what's fascinating. Cats can also learn to manipulate humans. They've developed a repertoire of behaviors specifically designed to elicit responses from people. The plaintive meow, the head bump, the kneading with paws, the slow blink that cat behaviorists call a cat kiss. These are all communication signals that cats use with humans but rarely with other cats. Cats have, in essence, developed a human-specific communication system. They've observed what works, what gets them food or attention or whatever they want, and they've modified their behavior accordingly. This is quite sophisticated, really. It shows that cats understand humans as distinct beings with behaviors that can be predicted and influenced. The vocalization is particularly interesting. Adult wildcats are mostly silent, reserving their vocalizations for mating or territorial disputes. But domestic cats have developed a wide range of meows, each with slightly different meanings. Some researchers suggest that cats individualize their meows for their specific humans, developing unique vocal patterns that their owners learn to interpret. There's even evidence that cats have learned to exploit our parental instincts. The urgent meow that many cats use when demanding food has a frequency similar to a human baby's cry. High-pitched, with rapid frequency changes, designed to be attention-grabbing and hard to ignore. Cats may have stumbled upon this by accident, but once they discovered it worked, they refined it. Then there's the purr. The purr. That remarkable sound that seems to epitomize contentment. That rumbling vibration that you can feel through a cat's whole body when you hold it. The mechanism of purring is actually quite complex. It involves rapid vibration of the laryngeal muscles, coordinated with breathing, and scientists still aren't entirely sure of all its functions. Cats purr when they're happy, yes, but they also purr when they're anxious, when they're in pain, even when they're dying. Mother cats purr to their kittens. Kittens can purr from just a few days old. The purr seems to serve as a self-soothing mechanism, a way of regulating emotions and reducing stress. The vibrations may even have healing properties. The frequency of a cat's purr, 25 to 50 Hz, is within the range that's been shown to promote bone healing and reduce pain in medical studies. But cats also use purring socially, particularly with humans. A purring cat signals approachability, friendliness. It's an invitation to interact, a sign that the cat is open to contact. Many cats will purr as soon as their owner begins to pet them, as if expressing appreciation for the attention. The hunting behavior of cats is another defining characteristic, one that has persisted from their wild origins. Even well-fed domestic cats will hunt. They can't help it. Hunting is hardwired into their brains, driven by instinct more than hunger. Watch a cat stalking a bird or a mouse. The crouch, the fixed stare, the minute adjustments of position. The slow, creeping approach. The wiggling of the haunches before the final pounce. This is not learned behavior. Kittens raised in complete isolation from other cats will still hunt this way. It's innate, encoded in their genes, refined by millions of years of feline evolution. And cats are phenomenally good hunters. Their eyes are adapted for low-light conditions, with a reflective layer behind the retina that increases light sensitivity. They have excellent hearing, able to detect sounds at frequencies much higher than humans can perceive. Their whiskers are incredibly sensitive, able to detect minute air currents and vibrations. They can move with almost perfect silence when they want to, their footpads cushioning their steps. The kill itself is precise and efficient. A cat will typically bite the prey at the back of the neck, their canine teeth seeking the gap between vertebrae to sever the spinal cord. It's quick, relatively humane. Cats are not cruel by nature, they're efficient predators. Sometimes, though, cats seem to play with prey, batting at it, releasing it and catching it again. This behavior often disturbs humans who witness it. But it's not sadism. It's usually one of two things. Either the cat is an inexperienced hunter practicing skills, or it's a cautious hunter trying to tire out and disable prey that might fight back, like a rat, which can deliver nasty bites. Domestic cats have retained their hunting skills despite thousands of years of being fed by humans. This is quite different from many domestic animals. Domestic chickens, for instance, have largely lost the survival skills of their wild ancestors. They can't really fly, they're not good at avoiding predators, they wouldn't survive well in the wild. But a domestic cat could, in most cases, revert to full wild living quite successfully. They haven't lost the skills. This is partly because, as we've discussed, cat domestication was never about intensive selective breeding. Cats largely bred themselves with minimal human intervention. And it's partly because even as domestic animals, cats continue to hunt, continue to use and refine their skills. The play behavior of cats, especially as kittens, is largely practice hunting. When kittens wrestle with each other, pounce on toys, stalk bits of string, they're learning the skills they'll need to catch prey. Even older cats continue to play, keeping their reflexes sharp. Then there's the grooming. Cats are famously fastidious, spending up to a third of their waking hours grooming themselves. This serves multiple purposes. Obviously, it keeps the coat clean and free of parasites, but it also distributes skin oils, regulates temperature, and serves as a calming, self-soothing activity. The grooming behavior is precise and systematic. Cats have a routine. They usually start with the face and head, using their paws dampened with saliva to wash areas they can't reach directly with their tongue. Then they move to the body, using their rough tongue to comb through the fur. They're remarkably flexible, able to reach almost every part of their body. Cats will also groom each other, a behavior called allogrooming. This usually happens between cats that have a close relationship, mother and kittens, siblings who grew up together, bonded adult cats. It serves to strengthen social bonds, to show affection, to help with areas that are hard for a cat to reach on its own. Some cats will even try to groom their humans, licking at hands or faces. This is a sign of affection and trust, treating the human as a member of the cat's social group. The territorial behavior of cats is strong, though it manifests differently in domestic settings than in the wild. Wildcats maintain large territories, marked with scent and defended against other cats. Domestic cats, living in close proximity to other cats and with humans, have had to adapt this behavior somewhat. But the instinct remains. Cats mark their territory in various ways. The most obvious to humans is scratching. Cats scratch not just to maintain their claws, but to leave visual marks and to deposit scent from glands in their paws. They also rub their faces against objects and people, leaving scent from facial glands. And of course, they spray urine, particularly unneutered males, to mark their territory. In multicat households, hierarchies develop, though they're more fluid and complex than the strict dominance hierarchies of pack animals. Cats negotiate their relationships through a complex system of body language, vocalizations, and occasional physical confrontations. Some cats become friends, sleeping together and grooming each other. Others maintain a careful détente, avoiding each other as much as possible while sharing space. And some never do learn to get along. The body language of cats is rich and nuanced. The position of the ears, the dilation of the pupils, the angle of the tail, the posture of the body, all of these convey information. A cat with ears forward and tail up is confident and friendly. A cat with ears back and tail lashing is annoyed or aggressive. A cat with ears flat against its head and pupils dilated is frightened and may lash out defensively. Learning to read cat body language is essential for anyone who wants to live successfully with cats. Cats are constantly communicating, but they do so in ways that can be subtle, easily missed by humans who aren't paying attention. And then there's the sleep. Cats sleep a lot, typically 12 to 16 hours a day, sometimes more. This is completely normal for an obligate carnivore whose wild ancestors would hunt in brief, intense bursts of activity followed by long periods of rest. Hunting is energy-intensive, and sleep is how cats conserve energy between hunts. Cat sleep is divided between light sleep and deep sleep. During light sleep, the cat remains somewhat alert, ready to wake and respond to potential threats or opportunities. You'll notice that sleeping cats' ears often swivel toward sounds, and they can go from apparently sound asleep to fully alert in a fraction of a second. Deep sleep, including REM sleep where dreaming occurs, takes up a smaller portion of the cat's total sleep time. But watch a cat in deep sleep, and you might see twitching paws, whisker movements, even soft vocalizations. Signs that the cat is dreaming. What do cats dream about? We can only guess, but given what we know about animal dreams, probably hunting, playing, or perhaps reliving experiences from their waking life. All of these characteristics, the independence, the hunting prowess, the grooming, the territorial instincts, the communication systems, the sleep patterns, these define the domestic cat. They're the result of millions of years of feline evolution, modified only slightly by a relatively brief period of living alongside humans. The cat has not been transformed by domestication the way some other animals have been. It remains, fundamentally, a cat, wild enough to survive on its own if needed, domesticated enough to live comfortably with humans, but always retaining that essential feline nature that makes it unlike any other pet. This is what makes the cat so fascinating, so endlessly compelling to those of us who love them. They are mysterious even as they sleep on our laps. They are wild, even as they purr in our arms. They are domestic, but never quite domesticated. They live with us, but always on their own terms. And perhaps that's why the partnership works so well. The cat has never fully surrendered its wildness, and we've never fully demanded that it do so. We've accepted the cat as it is, in all its contradiction and complexity. And the cat, in turn, has accepted us, sharing our homes and our lives while maintaining its own distinct identity. It is a partnership of equals, perhaps the only such partnership in the entire history of domestication. And it has endured for thousands of years because both species found in it something valuable. Not ownership, not domination, but genuine companionship, freely given and mutually beneficial. As human civilization expanded, as trade routes stretched across continents, as empires rose and fell, the cat traveled. From its origins in the Fertile Crescent and its early prominence in Egypt, the domestic cat spread across the entire Old World and eventually to the New World as well, becoming one of the most widespread of all domestic animals. This spread was not a single event but a long, gradual process, taking place over thousands of years. Cats moved along trade routes, accompanying merchants and sailors. They traveled with armies, providing rodent control for military encampments and supply trains. They spread with colonization, carried by settlers to new lands. And sometimes they simply wandered, following the expansion of human habitation, establishing themselves wherever they found the combination of humans, grain stores, and rodents. Let us follow some of these journeys, tracing the cat's dispersal across the world. First, north and west into Europe. As the Roman Empire expanded, cats moved with the legions, spreading throughout the Mediterranean basin and into temperate Europe. Roman settlements in Gaul, Britannia, Germania, all eventually hosted populations of domestic cats. These cats adapted to new climates, new prey species, new human cultures. In the colder north, cats developed thicker coats, more body mass. The selection pressures were different here than in the warm south. Northern cats needed to be able to withstand freezing winters, to hunt in snow, to survive in environments where their African wildcat ancestors would have perished. Interestingly, in Europe, the domestic cat encountered other species of wildcats. The European wildcat, Felis silvestris, which is larger and more robustly built than the African wildcat, with a bushier tail and less defined markings. In some areas, domestic cats interbred with European wildcats, introducing new genetic variation into the domestic population. This genetic legacy persists in some European cat populations even today. Medieval Europe had a complex relationship with cats. On one hand, they were valued for rodent control, especially in cities and on farms where grain needed to be protected. Monasteries kept cats to protect their libraries from mice that would gnaw on the valuable manuscripts. Ships carried cats to protect cargo and the crew's food supplies. But cats also became associated with superstition and, eventually, with witchcraft. Their nocturnal habits, their glowing eyes, their mysterious comings and goings. These made some people uneasy. During the height of the witch-hunting hysteria in the late medieval and early modern period, cats, especially black cats, were sometimes killed as supposed familiars of witches. This persecution, though troubling from a modern perspective, probably didn't significantly impact cat populations overall. The practical need for cats was too great. Grain stores still needed protecting. Ships still needed cats. And most people, even in the midst of superstition, recognized that cats were useful animals. Moving east from the Fertile Crescent, cats spread into Persia, Central Asia, and eventually to India and China. The Silk Road, that famous network of trade routes connecting east and west, was a highway for cat dispersal as well as for silk and spices. In India, cats were mentioned in Sanskrit texts dating back to the first millennium BCE. They were associated with various religious and cultural traditions, though they never achieved the religious significance they had in ancient Egypt. Indian cats adapted to the tropical climate, the different ecosystems, the new prey species they encountered. China has a complicated history with cats. Archaeological evidence suggests cats were present in China at least 5,000 years ago, though it's not entirely clear whether these were domestic cats descended from the Near Eastern population or a separate domestication of a different wildcat subspecies, the Chinese mountain cat. Genetic studies suggest that Chinese domestic cats are primarily descended from the Near Eastern population, with perhaps some admixture from local wildcats. In Chinese culture, cats were appreciated for rodent control, particularly in grain stores and silkworm facilities, where they protected the valuable silkworms from rodents. They appeared in art and literature, usually portrayed as elegant, mysterious creatures. But dogs were more prominent as pets in traditional Chinese culture, and cats occupied a somewhat less central role than they did in some other societies. Japan, however, embraced the cat wholeheartedly. Cats probably arrived in Japan from China sometime around the 6th century CE, possibly brought by Buddhist monks who used them to protect sacred texts from rodent damage. Japanese culture developed a deep affection for cats, which were seen as bringing good luck and prosperity. The Maneki-neko, or beckoning cat, is a familiar symbol, the ceramic figure of a cat with one paw raised, supposedly beckoning customers or good fortune. These originated in the Edo period and remain popular today. Japanese art is rich with cat imagery, from woodblock prints to poetry to folktales. The Japanese word for cat, neko, appears in countless cultural expressions. Cats also traveled across the Indian Ocean, reaching Southeast Asia, the islands of Indonesia, Madagascar. Sailors carried them aboard trading vessels, where they earned their passage by protecting cargo from rats. When ships made port, some cats would inevitably go ashore, establishing new populations in new lands. The cat's journey to the Americas began much later, with European colonization. Columbus's ships may have carried cats, as did most ships of the era. As Europeans established settlements in the New World, they brought cats with them. These cats found the Americas to their liking. Plenty of rodents, favorable climates in many regions, minimal competition from native predators in most areas. Cats spread through North and South America remarkably quickly. Within a few generations of European settlement, cats had established wild and feral populations across both continents. They adapted to environments ranging from the frozen north to the tropical south, from humid rainforests to arid deserts. In Australia, cats arrived with European settlers in the late 18th century. The Australian environment proved particularly favorable for cats, with abundant native prey species that had evolved without feline predators and thus had little defense against them. Feral cat populations exploded in Australia, and they remain a significant ecological concern there today, implicated in the decline or extinction of numerous native species. Cats also traveled to islands throughout the world's oceans. Sailors would deliberately leave cats on islands as a form of living food supply. The cats would establish populations, and future visitors could catch them for meat. More commonly, though, cats would simply jump ship on islands, or be left behind when ships departed. Island populations of feral cats developed, often with unique characteristics due to the limited gene pool and specific environmental pressures of island life. By the 19th century, cats had achieved truly global distribution. They were found on every continent except Antarctica, in virtually every human habitat from equator to Arctic Circle. This distribution is matched by very few other species, rats, mice, and humans themselves being the main examples. But as cats spread across the world, they remained genetically quite uniform. Unlike dogs, which were selectively bred into hundreds of distinct breeds with dramatically different appearances and characteristics, cats were left to breed more or less naturally for most of their domestic history. A cat from China looked much like a cat from Egypt or Europe. There was variation, certainly, in coat color and pattern, in size, in minor details, but not the dramatic variation seen in dogs. This began to change in the 19th century with the beginning of cat fancy, the deliberate breeding of cats for specific appearances. Cat shows emerged, first in England and then spreading to other countries. Breed standards were developed. Certain traits were selected for and amplified. This led to the development of recognized breeds like the Persian, with its flattened face and long, luxurious coat. The Siamese, with its distinctive color point pattern and vocal personality. The Maine Coon, America's largest domestic cat breed, adapted to cold climates. The sleek, elegant Abyssinian, the tailless Manx. Eventually, dozens of recognized breeds, each with its specific characteristics. But even today, the vast majority of the world's domestic cats are not purebred. They're what are sometimes called magas or domestic shorthairs or longhairs, mixed-breed cats that carry genetic heritage from the original Near Eastern domestic cats and from all the various populations that have mixed and merged over thousands of years of feline wandering. These mixed-breed cats remain robust, healthy, adaptable. They represent the true success story of cat domestication. Animals that can thrive in virtually any environment where humans are found, that require minimal care, that maintain their essential feline characteristics while living comfortably alongside people. As cats spread across the world, they also shaped the human cultures they encountered. Different societies developed different attitudes toward cats, different folklore, different practices. In some places, cats were revered. In others, they were merely tolerated. In still others, they were viewed with suspicion or even hostility. But everywhere, cats proved useful. Everywhere, they found a niche in human society. And everywhere, at least some people developed affection for them, appreciating not just their utility but their character, their beauty, their enigmatic personalities. The spread of cats across the world is a testament to their adaptability, to their usefulness to humans, and to something less tangible, their appeal as companions. People didn't just bring cats with them as tools. They brought them as friends, as familiar presences in unfamiliar lands, as links to home and comfort. And as cats spread, they became part of the human story in every corner of the world. They appear in the folklore and fairy tales of countless cultures. They're depicted in art from every tradition. They've influenced language. We speak of curiosity killed the cat, of cat got your tongue, of cat's cradle and catnap and catty behavior. The domestic cat, which began as a humble mouse hunter in the grain stores of the Fertile Crescent, had become a global phenomenon. A species that has touched human life everywhere humans are found. And in doing so, it had secured its future, ensuring that Felis would be one of the most successful mammals on Earth. The spread continues even today. Cats are still expanding into new territories, still adapting to new environments. They're found in Antarctica research stations now, though not breeding in the wild there. They live in deserts where their ancestors never trod. They thrive in cities that didn't exist when their domestication began. The cat's journey around the world is far from over. But already, in just a few thousand years, it has achieved something remarkable. It has gone from wild animal to global citizen, from specialist hunter of Middle Eastern rodents to generalist adapter to every environment humanity has created. And through it all, the cat has remained essentially itself. Still independent, still mysterious, still half-wild. Still the same elegant, enigmatic creature that first stepped out of the shadows into the firelight of human settlements 10,000 years ago. And now we arrive at the present day or something close to it. The cat that began its journey in the wild grasslands of the Fertile Crescent now sleeps on sofas in apartments from Tokyo to Toronto, from Mumbai to Manhattan. It has become one of the most popular pets in the world, with an estimated 600 million domestic cats living alongside humans globally. But what is the modern relationship between cats and humans? How has it evolved from that ancient partnership based primarily on pest control? And what can we learn from the long history of cat domestication about the nature of the bond between our two species? Let us begin with the modern home, a place the ancient wildcat could never have imagined. Consider a typical apartment in a modern city. There are no grain stores here, no mice scurrying through thatched roofs, no wild lambs at the threshold. Yet there is a cat, curled on the windowsill, watching the world outside with those same keen eyes that watched from the shadows of ancient settlements. This cat has never had to hunt for its food. It's fed from cans and bags, commercial cat food formulated to meet all its nutritional needs. It has never had to seek shelter from predators or harsh weather. It lives in climate-controlled comfort with soft places to sleep, toys to play with, regular veterinary care to keep it healthy. In some ways, this cat lives a life of luxury that its ancestors could never have dreamed of. Yet it still possesses all the instincts, all the behaviors, all the fundamental feline characteristics that were shaped over millions of years of evolution. It still kneads with its paws as if preparing a nest in tall grass. It still goes through elaborate grooming rituals. It still experiences the urge to hunt, though its prey might be toy mice and feather wands rather than real rodents. The modern cat is a living contradiction, a wild animal living in complete domesticity, an African savanna predator thriving in a third-story apartment, an evolutionary product of red in tooth and claw natural selection now existing in a world of scheduled meals and climate control. How did we get here? The shift from working animal to companion animal happened gradually, over centuries. As cities grew and societies industrialized, the practical importance of cats for pest control diminished in many contexts. Modern buildings could be made more rodent-proof. Commercial pest control services emerged. And as food production became more centralized and industrial, individual households stored less grain, reducing the rodent populations that had originally drawn cats to human settlements. Yet cat populations didn't decline. Instead, they increased, because by this point, humans valued cats for reasons beyond just pest control. We valued them for companionship, for aesthetic pleasure, for the simple joy of sharing our lives with them. The Victorian era, particularly in Britain, marked a turning point in how cats were perceived and treated. Cat shows became popular, beginning with the first organized cat show at the Crystal Palace in London in 1871. Cats began to be bred deliberately for appearance and temperament. Books were written about cat care and cat behavior. Cats transitioned from being primarily working animals to being pets, creatures kept purely for the pleasure of their company. This trend accelerated through the 20th century. As more people moved to cities, as apartments became common forms of housing, cats became ideal urban pets. They don't need to be walked like dogs. They're generally quiet, not disturbing neighbors. They're comfortable in small spaces. They can be left alone during work hours. They're relatively low maintenance while still providing companionship. The development of commercial cat litter in 1947 was a game changer for indoor cat keeping. Before this, cats were usually allowed to roam freely outside, coming and going as they pleased. But cat litter made it practical to keep cats entirely indoors, which became increasingly common, especially in cities where outdoor hazards, cars, other animals, disease, were significant concerns. Today, the relationship between cats and humans takes many forms. Some cats are still working animals, living on farms and in warehouses, doing the job their ancestors did, keeping rodent populations in check. But the majority of pet cats in developed countries are kept primarily for companionship. And what a strange, wonderful form of companionship it is. The cat-human bond is unlike any other pet relationship. It's not based on obedience or service. It's not hierarchical in the way the dog-human relationship often is. It's more like a friendship between equals, or perhaps more accurately, a relationship between housemates who have learned to accommodate each other's quirks. Scientific research into cat behavior and cat-human bonds has exploded in recent decades. We've learned that cats form genuine attachments to their owners, similar in some ways to the attachments between parents and children. Studies using paradigms from infant attachment research have shown that cats display secure and insecure attachment patterns with their owners, just as human children do with caregivers. Cats recognize their owners' voices and respond preferentially to them. They learn their owners' routines and adapt their behavior accordingly. They show signs of distress when separated from their owners for extended periods. They seek out their owners for comfort when stressed or frightened. At the same time, cats maintain a degree of independence that's unusual in pets. They're less needy than dogs, less demanding of attention. They can entertain themselves for hours. They have rich inner lives that don't revolve entirely around their humans. This independence can sometimes be mistaken for aloofness or lack of affection. The stereotype of the cold, aloof cat versus the warm, loyal dog persists in popular culture. But anyone who has lived with cats knows this is a caricature. Cats are affectionate, they just express it differently than dogs do. A cat's affection is often subtle. The slow blink, when a cat looks at you and slowly closes and opens its eyes, is a sign of trust and affection. The gentle head bump, or bunting, is a way of marking you with scent and claiming you as part of the cat's family. The choice to sleep near you or on you is a profound expression of trust for an animal that is vulnerable while sleeping. And then there's the purr, that magnificent sound, that rumbling assurance that your cat is content in your presence. There's something deeply satisfying about earning a cat's purr, about being chosen as worthy of that expression of feline happiness. The modern human-cat relationship has also been shaped by our understanding of cat welfare and behavior. We've learned how to create enriching environments for indoor cats, providing vertical space for climbing, multiple resources, food, water, litter boxes, distributed through the living space, opportunities for play and hunting behavior, quiet places to hide and rest. We've learned to read cat body language more accurately, to recognize signs of stress or illness, to understand what cats need to be psychologically healthy. We've developed better veterinary care specifically for cats, recognizing that cats have unique medical needs and that signs of illness in cats can be subtle and easy to miss. The internet age has created a new phenomenon, cat celebrity culture. Cats have become massive internet stars, with millions of followers on social media. Grumpy Cat, Lil Bub, Maru, Nala Cat. These feline influencers have achieved fame that would have been unimaginable to previous generations. Cat videos and memes dominate social media. There's something about cats, their expressions, their behaviors, their unpredictability, that translates perfectly to the short-form video format that dominates online culture. This unprecedented visibility has had interesting effects. It's made cats more popular than ever as pets. It's raised awareness of cat welfare issues. It's created economic opportunities. Some celebrity cats have earned substantial income from sponsorships and merchandise, and it's perhaps contributed to a cultural shift in how cats are perceived, from mysterious, solitary creatures to relatable, meme-worthy companions. But the internet cat craze also raises questions. Are we anthropomorphizing cats too much, attributing human emotions and motivations to them in ways that distort our understanding of their true nature? Are we treating them as objects of entertainment rather than as the complex, sentient beings they are? There's a balance to be found between enjoying cats' antics and respecting their agency and dignity. The same cat that makes us laugh when it startles at a cucumber or fits itself into an impossibly small box is also a sophisticated predator with millions of years of evolutionary history, a being with its own subjective experience of the world. The modern cat faces challenges that its ancestors never encountered. Indoor living, while safer in many ways, can be unstimulating. Obesity is a growing problem in pet cats, as is diabetes and other conditions related to a sedentary lifestyle. Behavioral problems, aggression, inappropriate elimination, destructive scratching, often stem from environments that don't meet cats' psychological needs. Feral and stray cat populations in many cities create welfare concerns. These cats, descended from domestic cats but living without human care, often lead difficult lives. Hungry, injured, prey to disease and parasites. Their impact on wild bird and small mammal populations is also a serious ecological concern. Studies have shown that free-ranging cats kill billions of birds and small mammals annually, contributing to population declines of many species. These challenges have sparked debates about how we should manage cat populations and cat ownership. Some advocate for keeping cats exclusively indoors. Others argue for supervised outdoor access, using leashes or cadeos, enclosed outdoor spaces. There's discussion of trap-neuter return programs for feral populations versus more aggressive control measures. These are complex issues with no easy answers. They reflect the complications that arise when a species that evolved as a wild predator is asked to live entirely within the constraints of human civilization. The cat sits uncomfortably between wild and domestic, never quite fitting into either category. Yet despite these challenges, the cat-human relationship thrives. People continue to welcome cats into their homes and hearts. We continue to be fascinated by them, amused by them, comforted by them. The purr of a cat, the weight of a cat on your lap, the sight of a cat curled in a patch of sunlight. These simple pleasures have touched human lives for thousands of years and show no signs of losing their appeal. In our modern world, full of stress and complexity and digital distraction, there's something grounding about the presence of a cat. Cats live entirely in the present moment. They're not worried about tomorrow or regretting yesterday. They exist fully in the now. Sleeping, grooming, playing, hunting, seeking comfort, responding to their immediate needs and desires. There's a lesson in that, perhaps. A reminder that for all our human complexity, we too are animals, with needs for comfort and play and rest and affection. The cat, in its simple feline wisdom, reminds us of these basics. And so the ancient partnership continues, transformed by modernity but fundamentally unchanged. The cat that once kept grain stores safe from mice now keeps our laps warm. The cat that once prowled the margins of human settlements now rules our households. The cat that once existed in twilight shadow now basks in the full light of human affection. It's been a long journey, from the wild grasslands of the Fertile Crescent to the modern apartment, from solitary hunter to beloved companion. But the cat has made that journey while remaining essentially itself. Independent, mysterious, graceful, enigmatic. And we, the humans who share our lives with cats, are richer for their presence. They give us companionship without demanding subservience. They give us affection without cloying neediness. They give us a connection to the wild world, to the long history of life on Earth, to the deep past when our species first began learning to live alongside other animals. The story of cat domestication is ongoing. It's not finished. Every cat that shares your home is part of this story, carrying forward the legacy of 10,000 years of cats and humans learning to live together. Every purr, every slow blink, every gentle headbutt is another chapter in this remarkable tale. And so we come to the end of our journey through time, from the wild grasslands of the ancient Fertile Crescent to the homes and hearts where cats live today. It's been a remarkable story, one of evolution, adaptation, partnership, and transformation. But what have we learned? What does the story of cat domestication tell us about cats, about humans, about the relationship between species, about the nature of domestication itself? First, we've learned that domestication is not always a story of human control and animal submission. The cat domesticated itself, or rather, natural selection in the unique environment created by human settlements did the work. Humans didn't capture wildcats and force them to change. Instead, wildcats that were bold enough, curious enough, adaptable enough to live near humans found themselves at an advantage. They had better access to food, better shelter, more opportunities to survive and reproduce. Over generations, this self-selection led to a population of cats that was increasingly comfortable with human presence, increasingly adapted to living in and around human structures. But it didn't fundamentally change what a cat is. The domestic cat retains the essential nature of its wild ancestors. It's still a predator, still a solitary hunter at heart, still independent and mysterious. This is quite different from how most other domestic animals were created. Dogs, cattle, pigs, sheep, chickens, all of these were actively bred by humans, with humans controlling which animals could reproduce and which couldn't. This led to dramatic changes in behavior, appearance, and capability. Domestic dogs barely resemble wolves in behavior or appearance. Domestic chickens can hardly fly and would struggle to survive in the wild. But a domestic cat could, in most cases, revert to wild living quite successfully. It still has all the skills, all the instincts. The difference between a domestic cat and a wildcat is relatively subtle. A bit more tolerance for humans, some minor physical changes, a more flexible social structure. That's essentially it. This suggests that the cat-human partnership is fundamentally different from other domestication relationships. It's more of a mutual tolerance, a coexistence, than a relationship of control and dependence. The cat has given up relatively little of its wildness in exchange for the benefits of living with humans. And humans, in turn, have accepted the cat largely on the cat's own terms. There's something both frustrating and admirable about this. You can't fully control a cat. You can't make it obey commands it doesn't feel like obeying. You can't force it to be affectionate when it wants to be alone, or vice versa. The cat maintains its agency, its autonomy, its essential feline nature, even while living entirely within human spaces. But perhaps this is precisely why the cat-human relationship has endured and thrived. Perhaps we need relationships in our lives that aren't about control. Perhaps there's value in sharing our spaces with creatures that don't exist to serve us, that have their own needs and desires and interior lives that we can only partially understand. The cat reminds us that we're not the center of the universe, that other beings have their own perspectives, their own ways of experiencing the world, their own validity. When a cat decides it doesn't want to be petted right now and walks away, it's asserting its own autonomy. When it chooses to curl up in your lap and purr, that choice means something precisely because it could have chosen otherwise. The story of cat domestication also tells us something about the unintended consequences of human actions. When our ancestors in the Fertile Crescent began storing grain, they didn't set out to domesticate cats. They were just trying to survive, to create food security for themselves and their families. But in doing so, they created an ecological niche that wildcats could exploit. They set in motion a process that would transform both species, that would lead to cats spreading across the entire world, that would result in hundreds of millions of cats living in close partnership with humans today. This is a pattern we see repeatedly in history. Human actions have consequences that ripple outward in unexpected ways, affecting other species, ecosystems, the planet itself. Sometimes these consequences are positive, sometimes negative, usually mixed. The cat domestication is, overall, a positive story for both species involved. But it reminds us that we're always interconnected with the rest of the living world, that our actions matter far beyond their immediate context. The spread of cats across the world also tells us something about human nature. We carried cats with us wherever we went, across oceans to islands to new continents. We could have left them behind. We could have relied on other methods of pest control. But we didn't. We brought the cats. Partly this was practical. Cats were useful, especially on ships where rodent control was essential. But it was also, surely, because we'd grown fond of them, because they'd become part of human life, part of what made a place feel like home. Because there was something comforting about having a cat around, even in strange and distant lands. This speaks to a deep human need for companionship with other species, for connection to the animal world. We're social creatures, we humans. We form bonds easily and readily, even with beings very different from ourselves. The cat, with its soft fur and soothing purr, with its graceful movements and its occasional displays of affection, met some deep human need for connection. And here's something remarkable. This need for connection seems to be shared across human cultures. Everywhere cats spread, at least some people grew fond of them. The specifics varied: how cats were treated, what roles they played, what they symbolized. But everywhere, the basic pattern held. Cats found a place in human society, and humans made room for cats in their lives and hearts. This suggests something fundamental about both species, that we were, in some sense, meant for each other. Not in any mystical or teleological way, but simply in the sense that our needs and natures complemented each other well. We had grain that attracted mice. They were expert mouse hunters. We had warm houses. They appreciated shelter. We're social and like having company. They, while independent, can tolerate and even appreciate human presence when raised around it. It was a match waiting to happen. And when it did happen, when Wildcat first approached human settlement, when human first tolerated feline presence, something new came into the world. A relationship that would enrich both species, that would spread across the world, that would endure for millennia. As we reflect on this story, lying here in the quiet of night, we might think about the cats in our own lives, past or present. Each one is a living link to this ancient history. Each one carries in its genes the legacy of those first wildcats that ventured close to human fires. Each one embodies millions of years of feline evolution and thousands of years of life alongside humans. When your cat curls up beside you, when it purrs under your hand, when it brings you a toy mouse and meows to initiate play, when it simply exists in the same space as you, breathing being, it's participating in this ancient partnership. It's living out the same relationship that began in the Fertile Crescent 10,000 years ago, that has persisted and evolved and spread across the world. And you, in caring for your cat, in providing food and shelter and affection, in enjoying its company, you too are part of this story. You're continuing a tradition as old as civilization itself. You're maintaining a bond that has outlasted empires, survived plagues and wars and migrations, adapted to countless different cultures and contexts. The cat has been with us through so much of our history. It watched over the grain stores of the first farmers. It prowled the palaces of pharaohs. It traveled on Viking longships and Roman triremes. It survived the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, the Industrial Revolution. It adapted to cities, to suburbs, to modern apartment living. Through all of this, it remained essentially itself. Still a hunter, still independent, still mysterious and graceful and uniquely feline. The world changed around the cat, but the cat changed only as much as it had to. It found ways to thrive in every environment humans created, while maintaining its essential nature. And now here we are, humans and cats, still together after all this time, still learning about each other, still figuring out how to share our lives in ways that work for both species, still finding joy and comfort and companionship in each other's presence. The story of cat domestication isn't over. It continues every day, in every interaction between cats and humans. It will continue into the future, as long as both species exist. And who knows what new chapters might be written? How might the relationship continue to evolve? What new understandings might we reach? But for now, for tonight, it's enough to reflect on the journey we've taken together. To appreciate the remarkable fact that this creature, the cat, chose to cast its lot with ours, that it walked out of the wild and into our lives, and in doing so, changed both our histories forever. So as you drift off to sleep tonight, perhaps with your own cat curled nearby, you can think of all the cats and humans throughout history who have shared this same peaceful domesticity. You can think of the ancient Egyptians, sleeping with cats in their homes. The Roman matron, her cat catching mice in her villa. The medieval farmer, grateful for the Mauser in his barn. The Victorian lady, dandling her Persian on her lap. The modern family, their tabby a beloved member of the household. All of us, across time and culture, joined by this simple, profound bond with Felis catus, the cat that was once wild and is now domestic, yet never quite fully either. The cat that lives with us but belongs to itself. The cat that is both companion and mystery, both familiar and eternally other. And in the end, maybe that's what makes the cat so perfect as a companion for humans. We too are creatures of contradiction, domesticated but retaining something wild, social but needing solitude, seeking connection but valuing independence. In the cat, we see something of ourselves reflected back. Our own complexity, our own contradictions, our own refusal to be simply one thing or another. The cat reminds us that life doesn't fit into neat categories, that wild and domestic can coexist, that we can live together without one side dominating the other. That partnership doesn't require submission. That love doesn't require possession. These are good lessons worth learning. And the cat, in its quiet feline way, teaches them to us every day. And so our story ends where it began, with a cat, watching from the shadows, eyes glinting in the firelight. But now we understand so much more. We understand the long road that cat has traveled to be here. We understand the complex web of evolution, ecology, and history that brought cat and human together. We understand what a remarkable, unique relationship this is, and we can appreciate, in a new and deeper way, the simple presence of a cat. The soft fur under our hand, the rumble of the purr, the weight on our lap, the companionship that asks for so little but offers so much. The cat is here. It has been here with us for 10,000 years, and it will, we hope, be here for 10,000 more. Good night.